everybody. Welcome to NFL Fantasy Live. Patrick Claybon here with Maurice Jones-Drew, Marcus Grant, and Adam Rank. Cynthia Freeland is going to be with us here in just a minute. Fantasy trade season is at full swing. Offers are coming in fast and furious. MJD, when you get trade offers or send them out, which player might you be rejecting harder than Derrick Henry rejected Josh Norman last night?
Well, Patrick, I feel like it's the other way around. I'm trying to get Derrick Henry from you, and you keep rejecting me. So I'll send you another trade during the show, and then when you reject that one, I'll send you another one after the show. So hopefully we can figure this thing out.
I have no trade offers to give you or to try to strong arm you into on this show. I will just say that I'm pretty much stiff arming anybody trying to come for Russell Wilson on any of my teams.
I'm always surprised the amount of times people offer me the Bengals RB1, and I'm like, do you know nothing about me? That player is not going to be on my fantasy team.
For me, it's any Jet. Don't want any part of it. We're going to talk about the Titans in a minute. But first, MJD, I want to get your reaction. Who did it better, Henry last night or you against Sean Merriman? Let's roll the tape at the time the lights were all the way on.
You guys were so funny. I would say this. Did Josh Norman bounce after he hit the ground? Because if he didn't, then I'll take the victory on that one.
The bounce factor is so key. Let's get to the fantasy angle on last night's game. Ryan Tannehill ended up as QB1 in fantasy this week.
He did, and he had a great game with 30 points, although I'm sure there are some folks out there questioning maybe if he wasn't across the line of scrimmage on that last touchdown pass, because I'm sure that probably swung more than a few fantasy matchups. Here's the thing about it. He's not necessarily doing anything special. He's just being really efficient, and he's not turning the ball over. He's mostly done well against defenses that do struggle against quarterbacks. So this week against Houston, I'm watching closely. I would maybe play the matchup because I feel like he may just give you an average number. He's not going to kill you, but he's not always going to win you weeks like he did this past week.
Marcus, don't be a hater. We love touchdowns, all right? And Jonnu Smith got 2 of them last night. He finished with 21 fantasy points. That was second amongst all tight ends. And you know what? He's been one of the more reliable options this season. He's had at least 21 fantasy points in 2 of his last 3. He's had at least 11 fantasy points in every game this season. And for anybody who's out there streaming tight ends, you know how tough that is. So if you have him, this is a fantasy stud. Make sure you're starting him every week.
Yeah, guys, for me, it's A.J. Brown, and less about fantasy. It's good to see him back healthy and being that number 1 target. As you see there, 21.2 fantasy points. But they targeted him multiple times in the red zone. They tried to get him the ball when they saw him in one-on-one coverage. And to me, that tells me that he is the number 1 receiver for the Tennessee Titans, and is probably be a wide receiver number 1 as the season goes on down the road. Because look at him. He's strong, he's big, he's physical, and he'll always catch that 50-50 ball.
A.J. Brown's been fantastic as long as he's been on the field. T.J. Yeldon was pretty good last night, too, for the Buffalo Bills. You see that, nearly 14.5 fantasy points for him. We're mentioning him here because he's just yet another obstacle in the way, it seems, of Devin Singletary being great. Yeldon played 40% of the snaps. He had 10 opportunities. There's 7 carries, 3 targets. Compare that to 12 for Devin Singletary. It just seems like the Bills are never just going to completely clear the path for Devin Singletary to go out and be a workhorse.
Yeah, frustrating situation for Singletary owners. Maybe the very few people who had T.J. Yeldon celebrating after last night. And over on the other side, the Titans scoring. It wasn't really eye-popping, the only eye-popping news item we got yesterday. It's time for In Case You Missed It. We start with the biggest news, the Jets releasing running back Le'Veon Bell. During the game, after failing to find a trade partner, Bell had a total of 113 yards in 2 games this season. He missed weeks 2 through 4 with a hamstring injury. He was a 5th-round pick on average in NFL.com leagues. MJD, what do managers that have Bell on the roster right now do?
Well, I'm going to keep him on my bench. I think that you want to wait to see where he goes and how he'll be utilized. It's not like he won't be playing. He has multiple suitors that'll be looking for his services in the upcoming weeks. So for me, I'm a guy who has Bell in a couple leagues. I'm going to put him on my bench, see where he goes. And depending on that, he could be trade bait or he could be a flex option for you. And then that kind of takes me to P. Ryan, their backup running back, who the Jets kind of said, look, we want to go younger. We want to get some of these guys going. LaMichael P. Ryan is a young guy that they drafted this year, obviously the 4th round. He may be a sleeper that you may try to go and get. Again, we heard Patrick say he doesn't want any Jet players. Well, sometimes you don't have the best team. You got to kind of rely on some guys, and maybe this may be a guy because, again, it seems like the Jets are going to figure out who these young guys are as they build this season up.
Yeah, know all about struggling in fantasy in 2020. The Broncos running back Melvin Gordon has been charged with driving under the influence in Denver. Head coach Vic Fangio says he expects to have a decision on his status for Week 6 in the next couple of days. But remember that Philip Lindsay is expected to return to the field this week after missing 3 games with a turf toe injury, plus that surprise bye week. It's time to turn the page now to Week 6. Let's meet your matchups, MJD. Which quarterback has the most favorable matchup of all this week?
Any quarterback that's going against the Dallas Cowboys defense, I'm going to say, and this week is Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray has been lights out to this point, averaging 7 yards per rush, rushing touchdowns, throwing the ball. We saw the big throw against DeAndre Hopkins at the end of the game against the New York Jets. Expect a lot of that. I think Kyler Murray is going to have a huge Monday night performance.
It's good to see Kyler Murray going downfield a little bit more. It's also going to be good to see Cam Newton back on the field for the New England Patriots. He has been cleared from the COVID-19 list, so he's on track to play against the Broncos this Sunday. And Denver's given up the 7th most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. They have the 2nd lowest QB pressure rate in the league, and you can tell that is really where they're missing Von Miller right now. I mean, Cam torched the Seahawks, who couldn't get a pass rush on him. I think he's going to do the same this week to Denver.
Yeah, I'm very excited to see Cam Newton back out there on the field. One player I'm not excited about, but he's got a good matchup, is Kirk Cousins. He's had at least two passing touchdowns in 2 of his last 3 games. And of course, going against the Atlanta Falcons, that team's allowed the most fantasy points to quarterbacks this season, over 30 points per game. They've allowed 300 passing yards in all 5 games this season. Of course, the Bears combined with Trubisky and Foles. So if you're going matchup-wise, it's Kirk Cousins. He just has to cut out the turnovers. Like, everything's good except for the turnovers. But, again, it's a great matchup.
All right, let's look over at running backs. Who's primed for a big Week 6?
I'm looking at James Robinson going up against the Detroit Lions, who've allowed the most rushing yards per game this season. They're averaging they're allowing more than 170 rushing yards. They've allowed the 4th most fantasy points to running backs this season. And, of course, Robinson has been one of the most consistent guys at the position. He's currently the RB12, which makes him one of the best. And you know what? I know a lot of people always love to talk about perhaps trading him because his value's high, but when you get a guy like this, you hold on to him. You take care of him, and you make sure that he's in your lineup each and every week because this guy's a bona fide stud.
That is a true running back love story for me. It's maybe a sneaky great week for Myles Gaskin, a week where there's not a lot of great matchups on paper. He had the first rushing touchdown of the season. On the goal line against the Niners, that's important because people have been worried about him losing goal line carries to Jordan Howard. He's been a serviceable starter without touchdowns. And perhaps now that the staff trusts him in the red zone against the number 28 defense against running backs, I'm going to go. Let's go, Myles Gaskin this week.
Yeah, for me, guys, it's going to be Alexander Mattison or Dalvin Cook, whoever is healthy. If Dalvin's healthy, I'm going to play him. If not, Alexander Mattison going against the Falcons. Listen, the Falcons' defense has just been giving up a ton of points and yards to backs. Last week, Mike Davis had a field day. I think Alexander Mattison, as we saw against the Seattle Seahawks, as we're watching here, has another opportunity to go out there and be great. And I think the Vikings want to continue to get the ball in their playmakers' hands, and that's these running backs down the field running the ball. And it's going to allow, obviously, Rank, who's not happy about Kirk Cousins, but to be able to use that play-action pass down the field. So I think Alexander Mattison will be a great start, has a great matchup this week.
All right, Marcus, what wideout's making you happy this week?
I'm thinking we're going to get some good juju this week. I know people have been concerned about Juju Smith-Schuster. Deontay Johnson's played well. Chase Claypool had the big week last week. But it's a good matchup against the Browns. They've allowed the most receiving yards and tied for the most touchdowns allowed to slot receivers. So I think this is a week that the Steelers look to get the ball back in Juju's hands, get him going a little bit. Plus, maybe we can see some fun touchdown celebrations.
Yeah, I like that pick a lot. I also like DeAndre Hopkins against the Cowboys for a lot of the reasons that MJD was talking about, not the least of which is him catching the ball with one hand. He's averaged over 100 receiving yards per game this season. The Cowboys have allowed the 3rd most fantasy points per game to wideouts, and they've had a top 12 wide receiver go against them in 4 consecutive games. This is the easiest start to even make for this entire week.
I'm going to go with A.J. Brown. A few days after he was a part of Josh Norman's miserable Tuesday night, the Texans secondary had one of their best games of the year against Jacksonville, but this is still a bad matchup against the healthy now A.J. Brown. Had 9 targets in his first game back. They get Adam Humphries back, but Corey Davis, we still don't know what his status is going to be. I think it's a great week for A.J. Brown. Time's running out for folks to turn around a struggling fantasy roster, but we're going to do our best to save your season. Marcus and I joined now by Cynthia Freeland. Cynthia, help the people out. Who should we try to trade for in fantasy right now?
Well, I'm always looking for people who maybe have a bad matchup this week that you could leverage that to get them at a low rate so then you can get them when they're going to get better even going forward. And the first is Robbie Anderson. He gets the Bears this week, which is not a great matchup on paper. The Bears defense is very good. However, Anderson has sneakily been wide receiver number 10 on the season, 5+ targets, 50+ yards, one of just 2 players in the NFL to achieve that in all 5 games so far. And you want to look to see that 17+ points per game in 4 of 5 games. That's going to continue because he is Teddy Bridgewater's number 1 option. It's just the way it is. So it doesn't matter that this matchup looks bad on paper with the Bears. Just use that to kind of sell your opponent to trade for him so that you can end up with Anderson. And then that brings me to my second stock up guy. That's Todd Gurley. Todd Gurley kind of quietly is turning back into the Todd Gurley we were used to in the past. 17th among running backs in terms of fantasy points per game. Okay, that's fine. But touches, points, all have increased in 2 straight games. And you know what happens when you lose a coach? You typically see teams go back to the basics. The basics of rushing the football and short passes to Todd Gurley, keep the pressure off Matt Ryan, and keep their defense off the field. That's how the Falcons are going to win. They're going to keep their defense off the field.
Yeah, that's the only way the Falcons can win in 2020. Marcus, Next Gen Stats also has some numbers that can be used to identify trade targets that probably are going to pan out.
Absolutely. It's called rush yards over expectation, kind of a new feature that we have this year that you can find on Next Gen Stats. And basically the way to break it down is expected rush yards are the yards a runner is expected to gain based on the location and speed of all the blockers and tacklers on the field. Rush yards over expectation is the difference between actual rushing yards and expected rushing yards. And you see here this list, Kareem Hunt at the top of the list with Austin Eckler. Latavius Murray maybe a little bit of a surprise. Zeke, not a surprise. Chris Carson there as well. But I want to start with Kareem Hunt because this kind of is showing that he is more than just a pass-catching back. And the Browns have really made it a point to run the football. And you look at what Kareem Hunt has done, certainly as a pass catcher, but you combine that with his rush yards over expectation numbers, his snap share that he was getting even when Nick Chubb was healthy, and his target share. And you can make the case that he has been a better fantasy running back than Nick Chubb this year. That'd be hard to get him in a trade, but he's certainly worth adding to your roster if you can. And the other one is Chris Carson. And it's been sort of a different year for Carson in that he's catching the football more than we have expected him to. But the rush yards over expectation are certainly keeping his rushing totals afloat. That's because he's getting fewer carries, about 6 fewer carries per game this year versus last year. But you add the RYOE, if you will, add that to him being among the league leaders in yards over contact, and he's still a very effective guy with the football in his hands.
Yeah, remember back when the season started, he had all those catches against Atlanta, and we thought, well, this can't be sustainable. And here we are. He had 7 targets against Minnesota in that closing moment win for start him and sit him with Adam Rank, who publishes his list of players to trust and who to shy away from every week at NFL.com/fantasy. And Rank, tell us why you believe in Fitzmagic this week.
Well, I know that trusting Fitzmagic is tough because going and destroying the 49ers on the road and then returning home to play the Jets and blowing it would be as on brand for Fitzpatrick as those Hawaiian shirts and his beard and everything. But he's had at least 21 fantasy points in 4 consecutive games. He's had 2+ touchdown passes in 3 of 4. It's a revenge game as well, so I don't know. I feel like we can still trust him. It's the final season. Let's go out and let's enjoy it. Another quarterback I'm enjoying, Deshaun Watson. And last week, they got rid of Bob, and he responded with the best game of his season. He's had at least 2 touchdown passes in 3 straight games. Good matchup against the Titans this week. I know that the Titans have a tough defense. They looked really good against Josh Allen on Tuesday night. But over the last 3 games against the Titans, as you see right there, 23 fantasy points. A lot of it has come on the ground, so he can do it in a multitude of ways. But I'm not shying away from Deshaun Watson post the divorce from Bob.
Right, the divorce theory was one of my favorite things, and so now you've got another quarterback who has his coach fired, and you got him on the bench. What's going on?
Yeah, but Dirk Cutter still lives there. So what does it really help out? You know what I'm saying? Like that's the. And listen, I understand. I'm probably a bitter ASU fan and whatnot, but I still have I have a hard time trusting Matt Ryan in this matchup. He's had a touchdown pass or fewer in 3 consecutive games. We just haven't seen the consistency. And again, unless there was a huge change at the offensive coordinator position, I'm not sure that I can trust it. And another quarterback who faced Matt Ryan last week was Teddy Bridgewater. We all loved him, and we started him, and he was great, and that's exactly what I want. You can show the good stuff, like he was good last week. We don't need to harangue the man. We just don't like his matchup this week against the Bears, who have been the second toughest team against quarterback. I think they're the toughest. You know what? I don't care what the numbers say. I'm not going to look at the numbers right now. I'm going to look at my eyes. They're the toughest team against quarterbacks this season. And Jalen Jennings has been a stud, so we're going to sit Teddy. But no disrespect to him. We didn't have to see those bad highlights.
Yeah, Bears a tough team in your eyes and in your heart as well. Let's look over at some running backs, Rank. Who are we starting this week?
Well, why don't I just stick with the Bears, as you alluded to the fact that I'm some sort of homer that can't have an opinion that's not, steeped in biasness. But you know what? This is a good matchup. The Carolina Panthers have allowed the most fantasy points to running backs this season. They've allowed the most scrimmage touchdowns to running backs. And the thing that I love the most is that David Montgomery is factored into the passing game, 6 targets over the last 2 games, and they're not dump-offs. They're designed plays, so I love to see that. Also like to see Kareem Hunt this week against the Pittsburgh Steelers, and I understand, don't look at the numbers because the Steelers are technically tough against running backs, but this is what we said about Miles Sanders last week, was that even though the Steelers are very difficult against running backs, they still allow at least one guy to get double-digit fantasy points. And of course, Sanders went out, had the huge run, had a nice game. I kind of feel comfortable with Kareem Hunt for that very same reason this week, so I'm going to start him and get him into my lineup.
All right, who are you uncomfortable with at the running back position this week?
Well, Mark Ingram, and this is ridiculous because nobody loves to run the ball more than the Ravens, and it seems weird that we can't trust a running back. That's like if you were a famous donut company and people only liked you for your coffee. Like that would never happen in real life, so I don't even know where I got that. But you can't trust one of these. You can't trust one of these Ravens running backs. It's ridiculous. And of course, Mark Ingram's being outsnapped by Gus Edwards. So I'm going to have to avoid this whole situation. And I don't want to play the guys going against the Ravens either, which is why I'm not going to be starting Joe Mixon. And listen, people were taking a huge victory lap when he had 40 points 2 weeks ago. And it's like, do you not understand this player's hit? Like every time he does well, he buttercups you. He builds you up and then just lets you down. And it's like it's disappointing. Like you can see he can catch the ball, and I don't know why they don't use him in the passing game, but they don't. So I'm not starting him against the Ravens this week.
Yeah, confusing offense at times. Rank's going to be back later on with more of his starts and sits for the wideouts and tight ends. For now, let's stay with that ground game and check out the FedEx ground rankings with Maurice Jones-Drew. MJD, we're looking for some running backs on the rise. Who you got?
Yeah, well, first I'm gonna kind of piggyback on what Cynthia Freeland talked about, and it's Todd Gurley. I think Todd Gurley is on the rise. He's going back to that vintage guy. Has 5 touchdowns this season, ties second most of the NFL. But it's more about who he's playing, his games coming up. Minnesota, Detroit, Carolina, and Denver. That is a great matchup for me. I think he's going to ball out, and they're going to lean on him a ton. As you can tell, they give him the ball in the tight red zone, and they allow him to run the ball. That's awesome. And number 2, we're going to go down to Hollywood, and we're going to talk about Darrell Henderson. And I think the Rams, we kind of found the guy that the Rams are featuring a little bit. I know Cam Akers has been banged up, but Darrell Henderson has been a guy that has continued to make plays after plays after plays. And against his Washington football team, defense has been one of the toughest. He scores 2 touchdowns and has a receiving as well. He'll start getting more in the passing game. He is a guy that's on the rise. Be ready for him.
Again, for Deal Me, as our expert fantasy managers get a shot at dealing with the unhappy players that NFL GMs and coaches face in real life sometimes. Cynthia, Marcus, and MJD. You're going to tell us how they'd respond to text messages or emails from guys who are on their fantasy rosters but are a bit agitated with them. And Cynthia, we will start with you. Tyler Boyd has this message for you. He says, GM Freeland, I'm wide receiver 18 this season, catching 80% of balls thrown my way. That's better than Diggs, Thielen, and Metcalf. Sure, I had a down week against the Ravens, but that was a deviation from the mean. Oh, a math term there. Put me in or put me up for a trade. You make the call, Tyler.
Tyler, we're going to stick with our starters. I do like that you use the word deviation. I'm glad you know what that means. However, I'm going to need you to step up your performances. It wasn't just last week. The week prior, you also had some decreasing results. So we're going to go ahead and stick you on the bench because, let's face it, you're playing the Indianapolis Colts, who are even less generous in terms of passing yards given away every single game than the Ravens. So we're going to go ahead and maybe next week.
All right, Marcus Laviska Chenault is also tired of riding the bench on your team. He says, hey, Coach Grant, I know I'm young, but I'm really starting to get a grasp of this offense. My fantasy production keeps going up, and the Lions are giving up 45 points a game to wide receivers. If you can't play me this week, can you trade me somewhere I can start? Nothing personal. Viska, he's so nice.
He really is nice. And you look, Viska, I appreciate you coming to me and being respectful like that. And I'll tell you what, we're going to find a way to get you some more opportunities. We're going to try to find a way to get you in the lineup. I mean, we have thrown a lot at you, moving you all around, inside, outside, in the backfield, and you've done well. 9th among wide receivers in total yards after the catch, double-digit fantasy points in 4 of 5 games. And you look overall, I mean, look, you've got more fantasy points than a lot of other really hyped guys like Marquise Brown, Juju Smith-Schuster, Michael Gallup, Jarvis Landry. So I'm going to try and find some ways to get you some more snaps. I think you've earned that opportunity right now.
Good resolution there. Bad news, MJD. A player who's going to Canton wants off your squad. Here's what Quintorius Lopez Julio Jones sent you. GMJD. I've been a top 10 wide receiver for 6 straight seasons. You've got rookies like Jefferson and Lamb starting over me. I brought you championships and you chase names on the waiver wire. Put some respect on my name or say bye, Julio. P.S. Tussin won't fix this.
Oh, so you guys just come right to me on camera. I don't get no B-roll or anything? Well, listen, Julio, I get it. You've been banged up a little bit, and it's been tough. Now, there we go. I've tried to trade for you, but Patrick won't give you up. I've tried to trade you away, but no one wants you. But you know what? I'll make a phone call to Cynthia Freeland, and maybe we can do a 3-way trade because you know what? I think you still have something left in the tank, but you know how they say it, it's a young man's game, so I'm going to play these young guys. So, Patrick, I'm going to send you a trade. Cynthia, I'm going to send you a trade. Let's talk turkey. Let's do this thing. Look,
yeah, we're gonna have to revolutionize the system to make it work. But we'll see. While fantasy teams, PR staffs are scrambling to post comment after these trade requests on social media, how about we just change the subject entirely and we get into Fix My Flex? This time it's other fantasy GMs reaching out for some advice. Marcus, this question comes from Hayden. Should he flex Phillip Lindsay, assuming no Melvin Gordon, or go with Crowder with standard scoring?
I would say if there is no Melvin Gordon, I would probably lean toward Phillip Lindsay because I think he will be in for a really big workload. And I know the matchup isn't necessarily great against the Patriots, but I do think there's going to be plenty of opportunities both as a runner and as a receiver out of the backfield. So I think that's where I would go. If there is Melvin Gordon, though, if he does play this week, I would probably switch that over to the Jamison Crowder side.
All right, Cynthia, in a PPR league, do you recommend that Rohit go with Chase Edmonds or Adrian Peterson?
Rohit, I'm going with Chase on this one for 2 reasons. The first, Chase Edmonds has had increased production every single week, and we've seen a lot more targets go his way. 15-plus fantasy points in 2 straight games. This was against the Jets, who ranked 7th, whatever. He ranked 7th amongst running backs against the Jets. Now he gets the Dallas Cowboys, who've given up the 5th most rushing yards to running backs this year. And I also think on the other side of that, I think in Detroit, it might be time to switch over to DeAndre Swift. Nothing against Adrian Peterson. I think they want to know what they've got in the young guy.
All right, MJD, a super flex question for you. Would you drop Matt Ryan and start Andy Dalton as a second quarterback in a super flex league?
I'm going to say I'm going to stick with Matt Ryan. The reason being is this. I think Andy Dalton's going to do more turning around and hand the ball off to Zeke. And I think Matt Ryan, they're still going to try to throw the ball. Like Adam Rank said, Dirk Cutter is the offensive coordinator, and I played for Dirk Cutter. He wants to get the ball down the field. You just have to hope that those receivers are healthy. Julio Jones has been banged up. A couple other guys are missing. You want to get Hayden Hurst involved. They want to throw the ball in Atlanta. Even though I said Todd Gurley's on the rise, I think Atlanta's still throwing the ball over 60% of the time. So it just seems to me there's more volume with Matt Ryan.
Time for Set My Lineup. Each week we ask you at home to send us your lineups via Twitter. We'll tinker around with them and try to put together the best lineup to help you get a win. And this week we got a lineup, a guy who's 0-5. It is Patrick Clabin. Oh.
No.
Really? We're doing this? I thought something was up. This is embarrassing, first of all.
Look,
but I'm interested. What are you guys going to do?
It's been a rough start, so we're going to try to help you get in the win column, help you catch a dub this week. So, Ray, what are you seeing here, first of all?
Oh my gosh, so many problems. Your quarterback, like, you can't leave Matt Ryan in there, but I'll let you dive into that one. You know what though? You look at this squad, and it's really not, obviously Julio needs to get healthy, but Odell Beckham Jr. is one. And I know that even in a flex spot, and it's, he's not your number 1 or number 2 wide receiver, but even in a flex spot, it's tough because we love him as a player. Like, he is a good football player. The offense just isn't conducive for him to be consistent. And that's one of the biggest problems, is that there's going to be those games like he had against the Dallas Cowboys. Like, yep, we expect him to be good, but then he can be taken away by certain matchups. Yeah, here it is. This is good stuff right here against the Cowboys. We like that. We just don't like some of these matchups. And this week against the Steelers, it might be another one as well. Unfortunately, you don't have a lot of other options there, so you're probably going to have to start him, but you're going to need a big performance out of him.
I will say this. I think some of this has just been a little bit of bad luck. For instance, you go get Leonard Fournette off the waiver wire, then he gets hurt and he's out for a couple of weeks. You get Julio Jones, a guy who's been kind of dealing with that hamstring injury for a while. But I think getting healthier will help. And now having Cam Newton off the COVID list, he is back. So he goes back into your starting lineup. Matt Ryan goes in and has a seat. That's another thing. I mean, Cam goes on the COVID list. He misses a couple games right as Matt Ryan goes just ice cold in your lineup. So, I mean, I talked about it a little bit earlier. This is a really good matchup for Cam. The Broncos are struggling against quarterbacks. They're just not getting any kind of pass rush. So if you let Cam Newton stand back there, he's going to pick you apart all day. But I think the biggest thing that's going to help you is just kind of getting folks healthy. So, that's what we got for you. And if you can get a win over Social Emily, that'd be great. You can get in the win column. Be fantastic.
Whoa. We're not rooting for him over Social Emily.
No, you
I'm
should
sorry,
be
like, no disrespect. I got to stand up for her.
Fix my lineup.
Yeah, I might have been sabotaging you.
What would really help me, if you guys could do this for me, my opponent's averaging 147 points a game this season. If you could fix that, that would be great. I would really appreciate that, and it would probably lead to a few more wins. I know it's an excuse. Anyway, thanks.
We'll work on that.
But stop for more money, mo problems.
For the rest of you out there, For the rest of you out there, just send us your lineup, hashtag #SetMyLineup on Twitter, and we'll help you out.
Okay, Pat, before you go,
more help.
We got it.
At least oh my gosh, we're gonna do it. You're gonna hit me up on the trade again. We're gonna do this
I'm
right
not.
now.
I just want them to change the picture because that looks nothing like me anymore. I've changed. And then I'm going to send you a trade that's changed from the trade that I sent you earlier. So make sure you look at your phone. But let's get into it.
All right. Okay. More money, more problems. Time for some waiver wire pickups. Chase Claypool went off. Is he more money or more problems, MJD?
Patrick, this guy is mo money, mo money, mo money.
Mo money.
Each week he's gotten better. That's right, mo money. Each week he's gotten better. And then he has this big game. And you can't expect Big Ben not to go back to their first draft pick right out of Notre Dame. Big receiver, can go down the field, catching passes, running the ball. He does everything similar to what he did at Notre Dame. Didn't really expect this much out of him, but when they're designing plays like this for him, you have to make sure you get this guy up and you put him in your lineup right away.
All right, MJD, Devontae Freeman looked good against Dallas. A lot of people do. Is he more money or more problems?
This is going to be a problem for me, and it's less about Devontae Freeman. It's more about this offensive line going against the Washington football team's defensive line. I got a chance to call their game against the Los Angeles Rams, and they're a very dominant bunch. And so I'm a little nervous. I don't know what's going to happen. I think this is going to be a team. Both are battling, but it just seems like the matchup for me is just not what I'm looking for out of Devontae Freeman.
All right, you're able to see Gerald Everett up close and personal. Is he more money or more problems late this season?
This is going to be a layaway play for me because the Rams have two tight ends. They're going to play Gerald Everett a ton. they're going to give the ball to Tyler Higbee. You just want to wait to see which game it will be. Give me a couple more games before I'll decide. But even though I know Gerald Everett is a big target and he's able to make plays like this consistently, Higbee will come up and have a huge game as well, like a 3-touchdown game in week 2 against the Philadelphia Eagles. So the Rams are just kind of, picking and choosing which guy. You just have to make sure you pick the right game for Gerald Everett.
Check out the FedEx Air Rankings now with our very own Cynthia Freeland. Cynthia and her analytical model have crunched the numbers to reveal the top stars of the week at wide receiver. And Cynthia, who are you most confident in?
So there's some usual suspects, but I wanted to give you a little bit more help on a little bit deeper of a topic. So I went to some guys like Kenny Golladay for the Lions, who you absolutely need to be starting. Why? He does rank only 18th amongst wide receivers in terms of fantasy points per game this season, but Jacksonville has allowed the 5th most receiving yards per game this season. This is going to be a good matchup in terms of those things like air yards and all of the predictive metrics that really matter in this season. So I'm thinking of Matthew Stafford to Kenny Golladay touchdown is a great thing. Now, one guy who's poised for a bounce back after last week is actually Justin Jefferson. Okay, I understand it was a really disappointing last week after a great matchup, but let's go back to the well. Atlanta has allowed 25 20-plus receptions. That's the most in the NFL. That's a big deal. I told you these deep passes matter. This is like a hint for later, a little tease for later. But Justin Jefferson is prime for a great comeback against Atlanta. It's a great matchup. He's going to be back right up there where he belongs, where you expect him to be.
Yeah, especially against this Falcons defense, which we can't even say that much more about here in 2020. That is Cynthia Freeland with the FedEx Air Rankings. Let's keep the wide receiver theme going here. With Adam Rank, start him and sit him. Adam, which receivers are we going to start here in Week 6?
Well, I'm going to go with Michael Gallup. And honestly, I like all these Cowboys receivers, but I think what we saw at the end of last week when Andy Dalton took over is that he was very judicious. He passed out the targets, 3 to Amari Cooper, 3 to CeeDee Lamb, 3 to Michael Gallup. But when the game was on the line, he was looking for Michael Gallup. So I'm going to play that, and I'm going to start him this week. I'm also going to start CeeDee Lamb because the Cardinals give up a lot of production to the slot receivers. So I think that's a good matchup. I like Jamison Crowder this week as well. I know you're a never Jets guy, but Jamison Crowder has at least 100 receiving yards and 17 fantasy points in all 3 games he's played this season. He's gotten at least 7 receptions in all of those. And he did it with Joe Flacco as his quarterback last week. So listen, he's quarterback proof. So you start him this week. Sorry, Patrick, but you gotta let one Jet have a little bit of fun.
I guess somebody has to be able to fly. Let's go over to the guys who maybe aren't quarterback proof or team proof like Jamison Crowder is. Who are you sitting?
Well, DJ Moore's just got a tough matchup, and I think that what we're going to see out of the Bears is that you don't want to start many receivers. I think Robbie Anderson has earned enough goodwill that we would take a chance on him, but the inconsistency of DJ Moore is going to leave him on the bench. The Bears have not allowed a top 20 fantasy wide receiver this season, so I'm going to pass on him, even though he was great last week. And I just have to say, we can't start AJ Green anymore. Like, it's just it can't happen. And, it's unfortunate. A.J. Green is one of my favorite players. I've enjoyed watching him over the years, and perhaps he just needs a change of scenery or whatever it is. And you're not going to show the one highlight, the one that exemplifies is there like an embargo that we can't show? You guys know the one. You know what I'm talking about. You know the play. And for that reason, I can't start the man, even though I love him. We played Call of Duty together one time. It was awesome, but I can't start him.
Yeah, so that relationship has come to an end, at least fantasy-wise. I'm sure you guys can still play Call of Duty. Let's look at some tight ends that we're going to start this week.
I'm going to go with Robert Tonyan. And you know what? I know he had that island game, and he went out and scored 3 touchdowns in prime time, and this may seem like we're chasing the fantasy points or something like that. But as you see right there, he's had 5 touchdown receptions since week 2, tied for the most in the NFL with Mike Evans. So he's getting his options. So I like starting him this week. And I'm going to start Noah Fant as well. He's been pretty consistent. He's had at least 8 fantasy points in every game this season, despite the turmoil at the quarterback position for the Denver Broncos. So 8 points doesn't seem like a lot, but if you've been streaming Mo Alley Cox or whatnot, then 8 points you'll definitely take it, especially against the Patriots.
All right, give me a sit at the tight end spot, right?
Well, I'm gonna stay away from Dalton Schultz. And, for years, you'd been able to just go ahead and start your tight ends against the Arizona Cardinals and you'd be fine. But they've actually been pretty tough. They've not allowed a tight end to have more than 55 receiving yards at any point this season. So I'm going to avoid Dalton Schultz, and I'm going to look for the Cowboys receivers to be the ones who are going to carry you in this one.
We're back here on NFL Fantasy Live. It's time for Trust Fall with Cynthia Freeland. Each week, Cynthia posts one stat to trust and one to question as a part of her game theory column over at NFL.com/Freeland. Cynthia, give us a fantasy stat that we can trust right now.
Okay, so it's 38%. That is the deep ball completion rate this season. That is the highest we've seen through 5 seasons since Next Gen Stats has been counting. It matters because the deep ball matters this year. You want to look at teams who are very good at completing deep passes and are very good at also stopping the completion of deep passes. One such team is the Packers, so that's kind of why you've been seeing such great results. You also see it from the Ravens. You also have actually seen Kirk Cousins pick it up in this factor as well, right? So the Justin Jefferson note from before really reflects that. And you also see it, Ryan Fitzpatrick, he's doing it too. You saw it last week. So any of those guys that complete the deep passes, when he comes back, Henry Ruggs, that was a great one when you saw with the Raiders. That's what you're looking for. Deep pass completions this season.
All right, so the deep ball is there. We trust it. What about a stat that we should kind of look at sideways a bit?
You should look at anything to do with the Dallas Cowboys looking bad. So let's talk about how fast Andy Dalton gets rid of the ball. So Andy Dalton, he has a very quick time to throw. That is the reason why the Cowboys have a 47% chance to win the NFC East, even without depth. Now, that stat, 47%, I'm not saying not to trust it. I'm saying, wow, that seems low because it's the NFC East and it doesn't seem very competitive. That's actually the highest in the NFC East. The next closest is in the 30s, and it's the Eagles. So it's realistic to say, okay, let's take a look at what Andy Dalton does really well, those quick passes. That means all of the receivers are still fantasy viable, fantasy good options. It's just going to look at matchups.
Yeah, they're going to have to be if they're going to contend with that defense being what it has been in 2020. A thank you and a farewell to Cynthia Freeland. We'll see you tomorrow right here on NFL Fantasy Live. Thanks, Cynthia. In our final minutes here, let's dig to the back of the fridge for some waiver wire leftovers. Guys, even if you missed out on the Chase Claypools of the world, we should still be targeting some folks on the waiver wire. Right, MJD?
Yeah, this guy here is kind of like my grandmother's gumbo. When she makes it, we all come in. And if you don't get the first pot, it's the second day where it's best. But it's Keelan Cole here for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Look, 5+ targets in every game this season, 3 touchdowns in the last 3 TDs in the 5 games, which is huge. And guess what? The Jags will be playing from behind, so they're going to have to throw the ball a little bit. Gardner Minshew targets this guy. He's been there for the last couple of years. Expect him to be huge. And like my grandmother's gumbo, you never want to go without having a second taste of it. I promise you.
Well, then I guess this would make Damian Harris a little bit like, that leftover Chinese food that you forgot was there. But hey, it's still pretty good because, this is a guy who started the year, was injured. Now he's gotten on the field, made his first career start against the Chiefs last week, had 100 yards. Likely to get some more opportunities this week. With 4 teams on a bye, people are going to be shorthanded at running back. So you want a guy who's going to be on the field a lot and get a whole lot of touches. That's Damian Harris.
And then I guess this makes Tim Patrick the pizza that you find in your refrigerator, and you just start eating it, and then your wife walks into the room and she's like, bro, we had pizza 10 days ago. What are you doing? And you shrug your shoulders and you're like, whatever. But I did like what we saw out of him. I know he was against the Jets when he had that little bit of a breakout game, but he's been pretty consistent. He's had at least 14 fantasy points in back-to-back games. The Patriots have allowed a lot of receiving touchdowns this season, so I think he has a good opportunity.
All right, for me, maybe Travis Fulgham is like the lemon lime sports drink. People look past it, but then it's time to finally get after it, and he is available in 95% of the leagues. If he starts the season with 200 yards and 2 touchdowns in the first 2 games, you have no chance at getting him. He's available now. If he underperforms from the other guys, take a shot for Travis Fulgham. He's out there. Go get him. No Thursday night game this week. Join us again tomorrow at 6 o'clock p.m. Well, I have to make sure not to upset anybody. And we're going to have matchups for you for week 6. Guys you might need to start, guys you need to fade. We'll see you tomorrow at 6 on NFL Network.